You think being visible means you're winning. You think staying in the room, staying in the conversation, staying available, you think that presence equals power. And that belief, that single, unexamined belief, is why you're still in the same position you were in a year ago. The moment you make yourself easy to read, you lose. The moment people can predict you, track you, anticipate your next move, you become manageable. And managed people don't rise. They get used. Right now, without knowing it, you are performing. For people who don't care about you. For timelines that don't respect you. For a social ecosystem that is quietly, systematically, extracting value from your need to be seen. You are feeding a machine that will never feed you back. And you've been doing it so long, you've mistaken the cage for your personality. What I'm going to show you today is a strategy. Not a motivation. Not a mindset shift. A cold, calculated, psychologically precise method for disappearing, rebuilding, and returning as something that cannot be touched, predicted, or controlled. Machiavelli called it strategic withdrawal. Psychologists call it identity reconstruction. I call it the ghost strategy. And once you see how this works, once you understand the mechanics underneath the surface, you will never operate the same way again. You cannot unknow this. So pay attention. Most people are addicted to visibility. Understand that clearly. Not addicted to achievement. Not addicted to progress. Addicted to the sensation of being seen trying. They post the gym check-in instead of building the body. They announce the business idea instead of executing the plan. They broadcast the struggle because the reaction, the likes, the comments, the perceived validation triggers the same neurological reward as actual accomplishment. Your brain doesn't distinguish between real progress and the feeling of progress. And the social environment you live in has learned to exploit that gap with precision. The weak man performs his evolution. He tells people he's changing. He documents the process, seeks witnesses, needs an audience for his own transformation because deep inside, he doesn't fully believe it's real unless someone else confirms it. That external validation is the leash. And most people never even feel it tighten. They want you performing. They want you visible, predictable, emotionally available, socially accessible. Because a person who is always present, always reacting, always broadcasting, that person is easy to categorize, easy to underestimate, easy to keep exactly where they are. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. He wrote that the prince who is always seen loses the quality of being remarkable. Familiarity doesn't breed respect. It breeds management. People stop seeing you as a variable. You become a constant. And constants don't command attention, they're simply accounted for. The ghost strategy begins the moment you understand that your absence is a more powerful tool than your presence has ever been. Here is what you are going to become after these 90 days. You are going to become unreadable. People who thought they understood you will find themselves revising their assessment. People who dismissed you will feel the quiet, unsettling recognition that they miscalculated. You are going to become impossible to manipulate, because manipulation requires access, emotional access, psychological access, social access, and you are going to close every one of those doors. You will return with a stillness that other people feel before you say a word. Not arrogance. Not performance. Stillness. The kind that only comes from someone who has spent serious time alone, in discipline, in silence, building something real in the dark. After this, you will never see social dynamics the same way. You will watch people performing and recognize immediately what they're trying to fill. You will see the need underneath the noise. And you will understand at a cellular level why you no longer live there. This changes the way you walk into rooms. The way you make decisions. The way you respond or choose not to respond to people who used to have power over your emotional state. Write that down. After 90 days of the ghost strategy, the version of you that needed people to validate your progress is gone. That version does not come back. Number 1. You cut the signal. The first move in the ghost strategy is total signal reduction. Not a social media cleanse for a week. Not a quiet period where you still check notifications. A deliberate, strategic severance from every environment where you have been performing your identity. Here's the psychology. Every time you post, comment, react, or engage publicly, you are reinforcing a version of yourself. You are telling your own nervous system and everyone watching, here is who I am, here is what I think, here is where I stand. That consistency feels like integrity. It isn't. It's stagnation with good branding. The human brain is neurologically plastic. Identity is not fixed. But it can only restructure in the absence of the inputs that built the old structure. You cannot become someone new while constantly feeding the algorithm that defined who you were. Most people attempt transformation while staying fully embedded in the environment that produced the version of themselves they want to escape. They want to change their thinking while consuming the same content, engaging with the same people, occupying the same social positions. That is not transformation. That is renovation with the foundation intact. Cutting the signal means this: 90 days where your output drops to near zero. No announcements. No vague posts about growth. No cryptic captions signaling a shift. You simply stop appearing. And you let the silence do what silence does. It creates questions in other people's minds that they have no way to answer. Power lives in the unanswered question. When people cannot track you, they cannot manage you. When they cannot predict your next move, they have to take you seriously again. The ghost is not absent. The ghost is operating in a space where no one has visibility. That is where the real work gets done. Do not tell people you're doing this. That defeats the entire mechanism. Comment: I move in silence. Number 2. You build what cannot be faked. The 90 days is not a vacation. It is not a retreat. It is a construction period. And what you are building must be real, because when you return, people are going to look at you differently, and there must be substance underneath the shift. Transformation without foundation is just rebranding. And people can smell the difference. This is where most people fail. They disappear for a month, they do some journaling, they read 2 books, and they come back expecting to be received as a different person. But nothing structural changed. The body is the same. The bank account is the same. The skills are the same. The discipline is the same. They just had a quiet month and called it a rebirth. The ghost strategy requires that you use the silence to build something that cannot be argued with. Machiavelli was precise about this. A prince must cultivate what he calls virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but capability. Real, demonstrated, undeniable capability. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it speaks through outcomes. During these 90 days, you identify 1 to 3 domains and you go deep. Not wide. Not scattered. You select the physical, the financial, or the skill domain that matters most to your next version, and you build with a focus that your previous, distracted, always online self was incapable of sustaining. Here is the social reality underneath this. When you return, people will look for a reason to explain the change. They need a story. They need to categorize what happened. And if the change is real, if the body is visibly different, if the skill is demonstrably elevated, if the presence is noticeably transformed, they cannot reduce it. They cannot say you just got a new haircut and called it a glow-up. The substance silences the skeptics before they speak. Burn this into your mind. The goal of these 90 days is not to feel different. It is to be materially, measurably, demonstrably different. Feeling is temporary. Structure is permanent. Build the structure. Number 3. You reconstruct the identity architecture. This is the layer most people skip because it's the most uncomfortable. Disappearing physically, reducing the social signal that's behavioral. What comes next is deeper. You have to dismantle the psychological identity you have been maintaining and rebuild it with intention. Every person carries what psychologists call a self-concept, a running narrative about who they are, what they're capable of, what they deserve, how the world responds to them. That self-concept was not chosen. It was constructed through repetition, environment, early experiences, and the reflected appraisals of people whose opinions you absorbed before you were old enough to filter them. Most men are walking around operating from a self-concept that was essentially handed to them by their worst moments, their most difficult relationships, and their most persistent fears. And they defend that identity not because it serves them but because it is familiar, and the brain treats familiarity as safety. The ghost period is when you conduct surgery on that narrative. This requires honest, private inventory. Not journaling for content. Not self-help exercises you'll post about later. A real accounting. The relationships that diminished you. the environments that kept you small, the emotional patterns, the need for approval, the fear of isolation, the reflexive self-deprecation, the performance of humility that was actually insecurity wearing a socially acceptable mask. You examine every single one of them in silence. And then you make decisions. Deliberate, unemotional decisions about who you are after this period. You do not become whoever feels good in the moment. You architect the identity that is required for the outcomes you want. And you hold that architecture in private. You don't share it. You don't workshop it with friends. You don't test it in public before it's solid. The weak need witnesses to their transformation because they don't trust that it's real. You trust it because you built it in the dark, with no applause, and it held. Say it clearly to yourself, I am not who I was. I am not yet fully what I'm becoming. And I do not need anyone's permission to cross that line. Number 4, you master the emotional vault. By week 4 or 5 of the ghost period, something happens that most people aren't prepared for. The silence starts to surface what the noise was covering. The anxiety, the loneliness, the unresolved conflicts you were medicating with constant stimulation, the grief you never processed, the anger you've been managing instead of examining. This is not a crisis. This is the process working. Most people reach this point and retreat. They go back online. They reconnect with people they were trying to create distance from. They fill the silence with anything available because what's surfacing feels like it will consume them if they let it breathe. Here is what you need to understand about emotion and power. You are not dominated by what you feel. You are dominated by what you refuse to feel. The emotional material you've been avoiding is the material that has been controlling you from underneath the surface. Every reactive decision. Every time someone said something and you felt your chest tighten before your brain engaged. Every time you overextended yourself to avoid feeling rejected. Every time you performed confidence to cover the hollow underneath that's unprocessed emotional material running your behavior. The ghost period is when you go into that vault and you address what's there. Not to become soft. Not to become expressive in public. But to become clean. A person who has genuinely processed their emotional history operates from clarity. They don't have hidden buttons that other people can press to control them. They don't make decisions from wounds disguised as preferences. This is where the real power is. Not in the muscle. Not in the money. In the complete elimination of psychological access points that other people can exploit. When you return from 90 days and someone tries to provoke you when they try to trigger the old reactive version of you, there is nothing there to grab. The button has been removed. And watching someone reach for a lever that no longer exists is one of the most clarifying experiences you will have. Comment: I move in silence. Number 5. You engineer the return. The return is not casual. The return is calculated. Amateur transformation ends with the 90 days. Strategic transformation begins with them. The discipline of the ghost period extends directly into how you re-enter. Because re-entry is where all of the work either crystallizes or collapses. Most people can't maintain what they built in silence once the social environment starts pushing back. They go back into old rooms. They reconnect with people who knew the previous version. And those people, not out of malice, but out of the basic human need for social consistency, will subtly push you back into the role you held before. They will reference old patterns. They will treat you according to the person they knew. And if you haven't properly sealed the new identity, if you haven't made it structurally robust, you will drift back. Not immediately. Gradually. The way a ship without a compass drifts almost imperceptibly, until you look up and you're completely off course. Machiavelli called this the problem of fortune, the external environment that constantly pushes against your intentions. He wrote that the prepared man, the man of virtue, does not fight fortune head-on. He positions himself so that when fortune moves, it moves him in the direction he already intended to go. Your return must be engineered the same way. You decide what environments you re-enter. You decide what relationships you invest in. You decide what social positions you occupy. You are not reactive. You are selecting with precision, based on who you are now, not who you were, not what's familiar, not what's comfortable. Some of the people from your previous life will not fit the new structure. That is not cruelty. That is geometry. You are not the same shape anymore. Some connections will not hold. Let them go without announcement, without drama, without lengthy explanation. The quiet recategorization of your social environment is part of the strategy. You come back quieter than people expect, more deliberate, harder to read, and you let the results speak in the weeks and months that follow. Not the announcement of what you did during the 90 days. The visible, undeniable evidence of who you became. Write this down. You don't return with a story. You return with a standard. If this is resonating, if something in this is landing in a place that recognition feels like, not just information subscribed to Dominion protocol. There is no motivation here. Only strategy. Now we reach the part of the script that most people aren't ready for. The part that separates the ones who will execute from the ones who will watch this, feel something, and then go back to the same behavior by tomorrow. The identity death. The execution. There is a version of you that built its entire identity around being liked, around being readable, around being emotionally accessible and socially available, around performing struggle for an audience and seeking witnesses to your growth because you couldn't generate internal validation on your own. That version of you survived on the energy of other people's attention. It built itself from the outside in. It needed the reactions to feel real. It calibrated itself constantly against external feedback, shrinking when criticized, expanding when praised, never stable, never fully itself, because it had no self that existed independent of the audience. That version must die. Not metaphorically. Not gently. Not with a farewell post and a reflection thread. It must be executed with the cold precision of someone who understands that as long as that version survives in any form, as long as you leave any door open to it, it will reassert itself the moment the environment gets uncomfortable enough. This is what the 90 days is designed to accomplish at the deepest level. Not just new habits. Not just new discipline. The complete obsolescence of the self that required external permission to exist. You stop asking for permission. From anyone. For anything that is within your legitimate domain. Your choices. Your direction. Your standards. Your silence. Your presence. Your absence. These belong to you entirely. The moment you start waiting for someone else to greenlight your evolution, you have already handed over the authority that defines power. The old version believed that other people's opinions were data. They are not data. They are noise. Some of it is useful occasionally. Most of it is projection. Most of it reflects the limitations of the person offering it, not the accuracy of their assessment of you. You consume it without letting it touch the architecture. It passes through. It doesn't restructure anything. The old version was afraid of isolation. The new version understands that solitude is not a punishment. It is a condition of clarity. You stop being afraid of the silence, because you have lived in it for 90 days and discovered that everything you were afraid of finding there, the emptiness, the anxiety, the confrontation with who you actually are when no one is watching, you met all of it, and you did not break. You adjusted. You became. The old version was afraid of not being understood. The new version does not require understanding. You are not a performance designed for an audience. You are an instrument calibrated for function. Whether anyone in the room understands what you're doing is irrelevant to whether you execute it correctly. That version of you, the performing, seeking, reacting, audience-dependent version, you execute it here. You don't carry it into the return. It stays in the 90 days. It stays in the silence. It does not come back with you. The rebirth. What emerges from the ghost strategy is not louder. It is not more expressive. It is not the dramatic before and after that the social environment trained you to expect transformation to look like. What emerges is precise, deliberate, economical. A person who selects their words, their movements, their relationships, their energy expenditures with the same intentionality that a skilled strategist selects his positions. Nothing wasted. Nothing reactive. Everything chosen. You become someone who people feel before they fully understand. There is a quality, call it presence, call it gravity, call it the absence of visible need that registers in other people's nervous systems before their analytical mind has time to categorize it. They lean in slightly. They choose their words more carefully. They sense without being able to articulate it that the normal social leverage they use on most people does not apply here. That quality cannot be performed. It cannot be faked. It can only be built. And it is built in the dark, in the discipline, in the 90 days when you did the work that no one was watching, that earned no likes, that generated no public acknowledgement, and you did it anyway, because you were no longer doing it for anyone but the architecture. History has always separated men this way. Not by talent. Not by intelligence. By the willingness to operate in the silence, to build in the invisible, to endure the period of absence that most people cut short because the discomfort was too much and the validation was too far away. Machiavelli understood. The strategists understood. Anyone who has ever made a real transformation understands. The ones who became untouchable were not the loudest in the room. They were the ones who disappeared long enough to become unrecognizable, and returned with something that silence built and nothing could take away. The seal. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are not here to be liked by everyone. You are not here to maintain the comfort of people who benefited from your previous limitations. You are here to execute the highest version of what you are capable of being. And that execution requires this: 90 days of silence, discipline, construction, and identity surgery. 90 days where you stop performing and start becoming. Where you stop reacting and start positioning. Where you stop feeding systems that extract from you and start building the architecture that serves only your direction. The ghost strategy is not for everyone. It requires a tolerance for isolation that most people will not develop because the short-term cost feels too high and the long-term return is invisible until it isn't. But you are watching this. Which means something in you already knows that the path you've been on, the visible, performing, approval-seeking path, is not the one that ends where you want to go. So make the decision. Not out loud. Not on a post. Not in an announcement to people who don't need to know your next move. Make it in the silence. Right now. Alone. Disappear. Build. Return unrecognizable. That is power. That is the only version of you worth becoming. Comment. Ghost mode activated.